Hi guys, so good to see so many people. Before we do get started, we have a small request. We really want to just get together and take a crowd selfie. If you would join us in that, is that okay? Yeah?
Yeah.
Cool.
Woohoo.
You want to join?
Okay. I have the shortest arms of everyone here.
You're the shortest one.
I'm the shortest
Hands
one.
in the air.
Woohoo. All right, thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. As we just introduced, we're going to talk about conquering new markets. It is, when starting a company in Denmark, it's such a small market that we kind of need to think about scaling from a very early stage. And with me today, I have 3 great panelists who have also been on that journey, who have conquered new markets, who have probably also made some mistakes along the way, but also made some learnings. And we're hoping to end the session with gathering some sort of a toolbox or some great advice for you to take home. But if we can start by just introducing yourselves and put a few words on what you've done before. Jen, do you want to go first?
Sure. I'm Jennifer Montague. I'm the Vice President of Growth at Onomondo, an IoT company. I've worked previously at Dixa, 23, and Planday, always in a marketing function, so I have a lot of experience of entering new markets and developing go-to-market strategies. I'm originally from the United States, from New York. I've worked in Switzerland, United Kingdom, and Denmark for the last 7 years. And yeah, I have a wonderful baby girl who was actually here with me last year at 6 weeks old. So her first conference was TechBBQ as well. So it's great to be here.
Great.
Yeah, and my name is Stine Sørensen, and I am co-founder of a company called Radiobotics that does AI technology for radiology departments, and we have tried to scale this internationally as well. I have, however, stepped down a little bit and is now joining investment opportunities as well. So I changed my role a little bit, but obviously been trying to scale internationally, and I think we have learned mostly from the mistakes and not so much else.
Amazing. What's it called?
Mølgaard Capital.
Mølgaard Capital.
You want to join?
Hi, friends. I can see a lot of familiar faces out there. It's amazing to see all of you here. My name is Strøyberg. I'm the co-founder of Humani. And to make it extremely short, 9 months ago, I actually changed jobs because we sold our old company, Good Monday, to DS. And at that point, I had a conversation with my father. And he told me, if you could look back and be as clever as a 20-year-old as you are when you're 80, your life is going to be fucking amazing. Based on that, we built Humani. Based on the knowledge that you can actually give yourself before you're on your deathbed. Before I did that, I actually had a company called Lemon Squeeze where we helped the companies enter and expand into the US. We helped Planday, we helped Falcon, we helped everyone else. We made some mistakes. Hopefully right now we can say that 98% of all companies that we helped actually made it. So I hope that I can give you some kind of toolbox today, and hopefully we can get down to detail, so it's not just fluffery panelist things, but it's actually doable things that you can dive directly into.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And Stine, I was thinking of starting out with you. Like you started Radiobotics, and then you identified the US as a great market for you to be in. Where did you start? Like, how do you go about that?
I mean, yeah, it's a good question. I mean, when you build healthcare technology, you always have a little, little eye on the largest healthcare market in the entire world, which is represented by the US. So if you really have ambitions, as if you really want to do things that makes a great impact, you always have an eye on that. So what we did was actually traveling over there quite a bit, investigating what kind of state would be most interesting. So the first thing we did was, where are the hubs, where are the money, where's the talent? So we went to Minneapolis, we went to Boston, we went to Texas, and went to Silicon Valley. And we identified that Texas Medical Center, which is the largest medical center in the entire world, treating 10 million patients a year, being the 8th largest business district in the entire US, we're thinking that's where we want to go. So that was the quick story of how we wanted to do it.
And then you joined an accelerator program.
Exactly. So they have an accelerator program. First time we applied, we didn't even get to an interview because it was so insignificant what we did. But at least I saw the opportunity. So we were thinking, how on earth do we get in there? So I actually crashed the Christmas party in order to make them aware of that my company existed. So that's a good learning, not necessarily crashing other companies' parties. But if you want to do business in the US, you have to be present and you have to show up. They are not really good at having meetings. They are really good at meeting in facilities where you can actually have conversations, and networking is the best way forward in the US, and that's really how we also managed to get on this accelerator program. So out of 350 companies from the entire world, it chose 9 and we were one of them. And I really think it was due to that I showed up.
That is perfect. And Mick, now you've also worked with a bunch of different companies. Did you see any crossovers in the different companies to be able to identify when are you ready to scale to a new market? Like, what are the things, the key identifiers that you need to look for?
Yeah. So to enter a new market, you need to be ready to actually enter the new market. So there's a ton of stuff you need to have prepared. First, you need to, before you take the leap, it's a big leap entering a new market. You need to figure out language, money, customers, decision makers, team build up, is it the right market, and so forth. So what we did in Lemon Squeeze, we built a model based on entry and access. Get everything under control. It's fucking unsexy, but you just need it. So it's like baking. If you have a recipe, if you don't have the recipe, you're just utterly fucked. So what we did was just to create that recipe for entry and access, which is getting your address, getting your bank, getting your people on board, making sure you know your decision makers, hiring the people that actually know the decision makers, so you have them on Rolodex, onboarding them to make sure they know culture, they know the product, they know who you are, and then moving into from entry access to traction and validation. Because this is not a product validation, this is a go-to-market validation because now you're in a new market. So you have to figure out, how am I contacting these people? How fast can I do it? How can I keep my budget as slim as humanly possible? And then get to scale and growth. Because now I know if I hire 5 more people, I will 10x or 20x what I'm doing, and then you go into the next phase. The thing is, when you look at these 3 points, it's going to happen again in the next market. So I think the biggest mistake you can make is thinking, I made it, I'm just going to open a new market now, because you have to open the company again, and you have to be as persuasive, you have to be on point with branding, you have to be energetic in the same way. But a lot of people, they open their first market, it works, and the next market is kind of like, we're just going to turn the switch on again, and then it will just happen. It doesn't. So it's kind of like the ongoing fight. And that's why you can see scale-ups sometimes missing the point of actually being persuasive enough, being there because they think it's autopilot, and it's not. Being a company that's scaling into new markets is just all about desire, function.
Yeah.
Can I just comment? So I 100% agree with you, and I can honestly say I have made many plans, and I've done all of the things you said, but I did not follow that plan. So what I think in terms of actually executing on it, I try to have one thing I'd like to achieve in a new market. So is there one customer that I'd like to have? Is the same thing with the accelerator program? That was what we wanted to do, and what does it take to get there? So I also think in a new market you have to find other very profiling customer or partnerships or an investor or something like that that can really drive those, and then these things are the operational things that will come after. But I must be honest and say that is the ideal scenario. In reality, I just need to focus on fixing fucking one thing.
True, but you can actually create the ideal scenario if you have the playbook.
Yes.
So there is also something in actually hooking up with people who know how to enter new markets and actually following their plan, because it's happened before. Somebody knows,
yes.
And you don't have to be like
You
a newbie
feel like
and
nobody's
everything.
done it before, but yes, you're right.
Yeah, exactly.
And Jennifer, you are nodding along. You
Yes.
both scaled into new markets with
Yes.
Plan Day, with Dix, and now Onomondo.
Yes.
Could you put a few more words to maybe having a plan and then following completely through?
Absolutely. I think to take one step back, it's important to understand the difference between growth and scaling, because these are two different strategies, these are two different mindsets. Growth is growing in a particular market, a particular segment. You know what value you're bringing, you know what your users want, you're building the best product for them. Entering a new market, it's like, you're stopping all of that because now you're starting again. As Mick said, you have to figure out what product do they need, what is the competitor landscape, what are the user needs, who's already out there, what's the messaging, what's your positioning, how much is it going to cost? So you kind of have to go into this new plan, this kind of new starting from scratch. And I think one thing that I think is very interesting is that scaling a new market is almost counterintuitive for the stereotypical entrepreneur, right? An entrepreneur they wanted to get out of the 9 to 5, they wanted freedom, they wanted to follow their gut, they wanted to do something different. And as soon as you enter a new market, you need to rely on data, you need to talk to people, you need to collaborate, you need to listen to other people, and you have to put your gut to the side and you have to actually go with what kind of consensus and data is telling you. Because as Mick said, it is not a one-size-fits-all, oh, let's just turn on some ads in America now. There's a lot more involved, and the more you stick to that plan, the more likelihood you'll have of a sustainable business in a new market. There's a lot of companies that go with their gut and they do what they did in Denmark, because it worked in Denmark, and it's a round peg in a square hole, and they fizzle out very quickly, and it's a lot of time and money wasted.
And to add to that, you also have to do those things, and then you just add 80% of risk.
Yes.
Because honestly, you can say all these things, but I just know from doing it that you have slightly clue of what you're doing, right? I mean, you try to put it on a formula. I mean, what we did at Radiobotics was we hired a company to do interviews to figure out two things: whether we were ready for the market. It was, is our product solving a need, and is there willingness to pay? And that was the two things we needed to have identified in order for us to actually then go do those things and then take a huge risk, right?
And the other thing that you did that a lot of people don't do is you identified one particular area to dominate and then build out. A lot of times as the kind of the team on the ground, the marketing team, we're told, advertise in America.
Yeah.
You can't treat America as one market, actually. It's a lot of different markets. So starting with Texas, doing your research and knowing this is where we'll have the biggest pickup faster is a very smart way to do it, as opposed to advertise to America.
Yeah. True.
A comment on that. So when we talk about hiring agencies to do testing, asking people and do stuff, I think it will always be complete bullshit, because you can talk to a lot of people and they say yes because they don't have anything based on it. But hiring a company to sell the first 10 clients, getting the first revenue in, figuring out how they work, that's how it should work. So considering entering a new market should be starting a new company. So you should go out there, you should be fucking hands-on and just do everything you can, because a marketing agency that says, like, we've talked to 100 people, they all said they liked it. Doesn't matter if they won't pay the bill. So selling comes first in everything. And I think there is some lightning points in all of this. You need to figure out who you're selling to. You need to figure out why they want to buy it. You need to figure out how much it costs. And then you need to hire right. The right people makes your life so much easier. It's just, life is easy when you have talent on board. Mm-hmm. And
sure.
Talent rules everything.
And selling to the right people, Stine, we also talked about that and the difference in selling to different countries. You touched upon that earlier with the Americans. You have to show up, you have to be there. Did you also see some differences in how you had to sell in other areas in the States?
Oh, in many ways, and this is obviously said with all respect for different kinds of cultures, but coming from a Danish healthcare society where it's incrementally different from a US one, and when you show up the first time because you have no experience with this, and you're basically just presenting a Danish model, and they're sitting there, great, how can I make more money out of this? And you'll be like, yeah, well, maybe, I don't know, but it's really great for the patient, and then you don't get invited back to another meeting, and so in that sense, you really have to dig deeper into it. But I also think you have to learn this by doing it. I mean, it's easy for me to say this, but I actually think you have to sit in this meeting and come out of it and thinking we really fucked that up, and because that gives you sort of the power to go home and change it and make sure, do the calculations and really understand. I've also been dealing a lot with investors in the US and received a lot of, practice in how do you speak to American investors. And coming from Denmark, you spend a lot of time qualifying why this is a great product and what have you done and how is it clinically validated. In the US, the only thing I had to say is that we give radiologists superpowers. And then everybody from Denmark would be laughing a little bit, but in the US it actually works. But I would never say this in a Scandinavian context. But you just have to trust the process and practice saying those kind of things that you maybe feel a little difficult saying, but it actually works. So I think there's many things that has to be adjusted towards this, and you have to face it and see it yourself before you really change it. But there's so many differences, and I can tell many more funny stories of how we did not meet expectations.
Maybe could you also put a few more words to that, because you've both been working and selling in multiple countries.
I think the first step, if you guys want to have an actionable step of entering a new market, the first thing I would do is have your marketing team set up a Google Ads account in that market. That is going to tell you how much these leads are going to cost. That's going to tell you what people are Googling when they click on your website. And actually, a slight anecdote I have about that is when we were at Plan Day is a scheduling software. So we called it scheduling software. And when we wanted to double down on the UK, I was doing ads saying scheduling software. But when I looked at the Google Analytics, what it told me was actually Rhoda was the thing that people were Googling. And so we just changed our entire messaging, Plan Day, Rhoda software. And that was I speak English, but it's a localization that we miss. And that's something that we would probably have taken a very long time to find out without using this kind of quick and easy tool. And then we could start A/B testing, and then we could try to figure out our messaging and our positioning within this market. So that is kind of an actionable way of getting started to figure out how you're going to refer to yourself in this new market.
Just to follow up on Plan Day, because that's actually one of my favorite cases. And again, we helped Plan Day set up shop in New York back in the days. I think one of the most cool things about what happened with Plan Day was not to enter the US, but wait 4 months, because we went out there selling Plan Day on behalf of Plan Day just to make sure that there was a product market fit. But it wasn't in Spanish. So when you look at the tool and when you look at the people working using that tool, if it's not in Spanish, it doesn't work. So instead of trying to enter a market where there is no product market fit, let's just go out there, see if we can sell it to 10. If 10 of them says like, you need to be in Spanish or else we won't buy, then you have to go back into shop and just fix it again. And I think that those moves are extremely important. But the cool thing is, we didn't. If I just asked them, would you use this? They would have said yes. When I said, you have to pay for it, they said no, because we're lacking these 3 features. And suddenly we could moderate the product. And then when we went in, it went fast, as you know.
Yes.
So we could conquer the market.
And that's a good point of thinking about your market. I mean, Plan Day is a scheduling tool predominantly used by restaurants. Those are your end users. So, making sure that Spanish is widely spoken in the catering industry, making sure we had that was a really big, important
It's the same with
learning.
Jonah Juice. When they entered the US, they thought that they could get juicers like that, because when you say juicer in Denmark, it's someone from Jonah Juice. When you say juicer in America, it's either something that is tangible, that you put stuff into, or it's someone that's using steroids, right?
Yeah.
So in the US, they couldn't get anyone, but they didn't know. So they just opened shop and thought, now we'll just open the doors, everybody will come in. But we had to close the doors and say, like, we're only picking out the few ones. When they had the team, people would know, these are juicers. They're from Denmark, this is what it's called. And suddenly, you had like 200 people at the door saying like, I want to be a juicer. So we changed the whole way of looking at it.
And how do you get to learn all of those things? Like, do you have to just commit 100% to a market and then just go there? Then that's what you do? Or how do you get started in getting those learnings in?
Well, I have a playbook. If anyone wants a playbook, I don't know if my mail is anywhere. Do you know? No. If anyone wants a playbook, I can share it with you, because I have a market entry playbook. So I can share it with all of you. There is certain steps you just need to take. Cultures are different. London is not the same as New York. New York is not the same as Berlin. But there is a recipe for everything that you do. But first of all, that recipe changes when you hire people. Again, talent is everything in all of this. Figuring out how to get the best people on board from the get-go determines the journey. But there is still a recipe for, you can look at like top 100 companies entering and expanding into new markets. They did the same. Some had luck, networking, they met someone and things happened. But if you stick to the recipe, you're almost there. And again, I made the recipe based on, I was a part of Issue, helped them to the US, had to set everything up, made 100 million fucking mistakes on the way, wrote everything down, and then people started contacting me saying like, can you help my company do what you just did for Issue? Then I had to kind of like tweak it in, make it better in emails, nights and weekends. And then 5 more companies said, can you help us? I said, like, I have a job, but I can send you something. And then at the end, suddenly I had a whole program because they were all asking for the same stuff. They couldn't get a bank account. They couldn't get an office. They didn't know where to hire. They didn't know how to set it up. They didn't know where to start because it's kind of like, I don't know if you know the old Asterix labyrinth where you kind of like just fool around. There is like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 steps. You can't get an entity without an office address. You can't get a bank without the entity. You can't hire people because you can't make salaries. So you need to know where to start and where to end just to get started. And it's painful. At Lemon Squeeze, we called it biocost. For those of you who don't know biocost is when you're in the shower and you're thinking about 1,000 things that you don't know how to grasp upon. So it's when you can't sleep, you don't want to make love to your wife, you can't talk to your friends because there's so many things happening that you can't do anything about. If you can delete that biocost and actually know exactly what you need to do, then you're super productive. Opening a new market is just difficult, so you need to know the recipe.
Mm-hmm. So one thing is having the recipe, but we also talked about there is both the plan, but there's also a certain amount of serendipity, and that could also play into the networks. So can we touch upon like how do you get a network started in a new market? Like, how do you go about that?
I mean, if you ask me, you have to show up, right? So we've actually seen when we started investigating the opportunities in the US for Radiobotics, I spent quite some time there traveling around, but I've actually seen that within a year time, we have been so present that people start to know of us. So the first time that we were in a meeting where somebody was like, we heard about you, we met somebody that had actually also been talking about your product. And I think that was a great experience to see that a year of hard work in a certain area paid off really well, because when people start to know of you, everything gets much easier. So it is hard work and you have to be present. I chose not to live in the US, but that's for many reasons, especially not in Texas, but I mean, that we can discuss at a later point why you don't want to live there. But so I travel there quite a lot, and some will maybe say that was, we could have maybe have fast-tracked that if we would have lived there. So that could be a point, but I also think that you have to maintain a healthy work-life balance and those things. So for us, we went there and we could see within a year's time, it was actually circling around, and I think that's something I really have learned is that, you know, you have to be there for a year and then you will maybe have a breakthrough in terms of that people actually recognize your company and what you do.
Mm-hmm. We also talked about work-life balance in terms of scaling to new markets. Could you maybe touch upon some of the differences you've made when scaling in one company and in another company, and now with Onomondo? Like, what have you taken with you?
Well, I think the important thing that I've learned, and we're doing at Onomondo, is we're waiting on breaking into America because of so many different reasons. As being brought up here, is we want to dominate our home market first and build that trust and build that authority. Time zones are also a big issue. It's pretty much a no-brainer, but if you can't, your customers are not going to work to your time zone, right? So how are you going to have customer support available to the United States, to LA, and let your customer support team have a life? So that's something that's really important, and that's why it's important to have boots on the ground who can deliver that kind of support in real time. But I think, you know, there's so many differences. I've seen so many times where you try to transplant the Danish way of doing things in America, And it is a very, very different culture. We don't have maternity leave, still. We don't have healthcare, still. We don't have a lot of the things that Danish workers have. And that is a problem, and that is something that means that there is a different cultural approach to work in the United States. So it's more easier to build that up with Americans and living in America. But I think it's also very important to try to bring that Danish mentality to that office. However, that's not very easy to do. I don't know if you guys have had experience in trying to bring that.
I actually tried to. I spoke to some U.S. lawyers when we were incorporating Radiobotics Inc. in Texas, and I said I'd like to have some more Scandinavian principles in terms of how much holiday do you have, how much time will you have before you can quit. And these lawyers actually refused to work with me because they could not put their name on these kind of ridiculous terms that we had in a communist society like Scandinavia.
Yeah.
So I did not succeed with that.
And on the other side of that, what I've seen not work very well is sometimes Danish companies bring over an American, right, to do something with your product or your marketing or whatever it is and think, okay, now we have an American here, they're going to build the product that's going to launch in America, and they're making you work on weekends, they're not letting you have holiday, they're calling you when you're sick, and all the things that Danish workers hold very strongly as part of our values, right? And then you have that kind of tension, that friction. So it's very difficult to transplant one for one. You have to really understand the culture, and as Stine has said time and time again, you have to be there. You have to build from there.
But I was not there the entire time, so I say it with a little bit of hesitation.
Okay.
Can I add a note to the work-life balance? It is still so fucked that we call it work-life balance. Like, how come work comes before life? There's something that is utterly wrong. It's a life balance where inside of that you have relationships, you have your family, you have your friends, you have everything that goes around. And work is one of them because you need to make money. So when it comes to entering a new market, it's not looking into a life balance in the same degree where we call it work-life balance. It's about life. So if you want to enter a new market, it's going to demand a lot of power. Getting a kid demands a ton of power. Getting a new girlfriend and actually retaining seems weird when you talk about girlfriends, but having her on board and making sure that she still loves you. But there is just something in everything takes out a lot of power. So in this life balance, if you make the decision of entering a new market, it's going to demand a lot of you. And it's not work, especially not if it's your company. It's a decision where now I'm going to focus on this. Inside of all of this, if you have kids and a girlfriend or wife or something else, everything just gets clustered in together. But there is a focus right now on this needs to actually happen. So I hate work-life balance because there is life. Inside of that, there is different things that you need to take care of. And I think we all should remember that because I think we get fucking stressed by having work-life balance because we should have a life balance where we make sure that we even everything out. People don't get stressed by work. People get stressed by their fiance that wants to leave them or their kids that didn't get food that day or something that's happening. Work is work. It's just a part of the entire equation of 1,000 things.
But I think that the point of that is obviously that perception that you have is different in each market, right? And the people that you meet is having different perspectives. And I think it's navigating those things that is the most important thing you have as a CEO or founder of a company is to create those where the values are to some way aligned in some way, but you have to expect they can be very different in different markets, right?
True.
Well, maybe let's stay with the differences. Like, what are some of the differences? Because now we've been talking a lot about the US and going from Denmark to the US, but there's also the whole opportunity of scaling to any country in Europe or to the UK. I mean, what are some of the differences you've experienced between different markets?
I think breaking into DACH. DACH is a region that a lot of people want to break into. There's a lot of money. They're very tech savvy, but there's a very strict on data. So when we've broken into the DACH region, we've had to make a lot of changes when it comes to privacy, when it comes to data, even how we interact with people on stands. People didn't like having QR codes because they wanted to know, what are you going to do with my data? So I think when you break into DACH, you have to understand there's a lot of legal compliance, depending on the nature of your product. There is also a level of English. I work in IoT, which tends to be English, but at Plan Day, working with restaurants, as Mick pointed out, there wasn't that level of English. So I think there's a lot of cultural differences that you have to take into account. And I loved it when people said, oh, just go into Switzerland. I lived in Switzerland for 4 years. There's 3 official languages in Switzerland, German being only one of them. So throwing Switzerland into DACH was actually a little bit short-sighted because you're missing out on the French-speaking and the Italian-speaking as well. But yeah, I think it's hard to do one-size-fits-all for anything, especially, America. But
I also think there is, I mean, again, going back to what you said first, what is the recipe? And what I navigate towards is, does your product solve any problems, and is there willingness to pay for it? I think those are the 2 things that also navigate of which market you're going in. And then you filter down towards, are there any interesting partners there? Are there any competitors there? Because at Radiobotics, we had some very strong competitors in Austria, in Germany, and in France. And the good thing is that they stick to their local language, so that's also fine for me, but I don't want to touch these markets, right? So I think you have different things that you navigate towards, but I also think that sometimes the opportunities comes the other way, right? There's somebody reaching out to you, say, I want to sell your product, I want to work for you, I want to invest in you, or I want to sort of use your product, right? So there are things that can also help you where you don't necessarily actively on your own take your decisions, but it's being an opportunity as well. And I think that's also where it's really nice to go to a new market, because you've seen an opportunity there. It was not on any of the slides or your strategies and the recipes that you have worked on, but then there comes an opportunity. And I also think that is what can change plans a little bit, and what you also have to listen to, right? Because you have not solved all of the things, and you might only have product market fit in your own market, as you say, for are you growing, or are you scaling, or what are you doing, right? So I think that's investigating and then looking for opportunities are the 2 things that can drive those decisions.
Mm-hmm. I think the most fun thing is employees. I get baffled every time I enter a new market. And I started out with Sweet Deal, where I went to Sweden, Norway, Poland, Belgium, and the Netherlands. And of course I had the US, and we had London. I think the cool thing is that looking at the 100 companies plus that we helped in the US was when we saw the CEO or whoever was in charge fly into New York and say, like, you can do whatever you want. And then see senior people in New York being super anxious, kind of like, am I going to be fired? Am I fucked? And they're kind of like, can't you micromanage me? Even though they were 40 years old. Because they know that if they get fired before 12, you know that, then there's just no paycheck for the rest of the day, where in Denmark it's kind of like, you can fire me, asshole. I'm going to have 3 months. But here there's just something else going on. So actually wanting to have a different set of management tools is something that is still baffling me. It's kind of like, you can do what you want, just create results. Where I'm kind of like, no, I need you to look over my shoulder to make sure that I'm on the right path. Because I don't want to get fired, and I want to make things right. In the beginning, it's just super important that you adapt to that culture, because you can't say, like, you have autonomous freedom, it's just you, go for it, because they don't want it. Like, they become sad and anxious and everything else. So I think going into new countries, setting up new markets, the most important thing is to figure out the culture of the people you're hiring, because you're not the same.
We just have a question from the audience. So there's a lot of startup founders who might see the US as a big opportunity, but what are your thoughts about maybe moving a bit slower and then conquering the European market before moving into the US, or just going all in the US?
As the boots on the ground who will be the ones executing, I say wait, think it through. And I think one thing that founders also should do is speak to people about this idea. A lot of times the idea of scaling is done at a different level, and you're just told, we're going to America. And you kind of think, well, what about this, and what about this, and what about this? And, you know, it's important to have that transparency and that communication, and letting people feel part of the process and heard, so that you can do this sustainably and successfully. But yeah, I think, knowing your neighbors is a lot easier than jumping headfirst into a completely new culture.
Being the person doing it, you always would like it to go a little bit slower. I think it comes down to some principles that you would have within your company. Would you, in general, like to do things in a different pace that you're up against? Or would you, in general, like to actually decide to move faster and scale and raise more money and do those things? the investors that you have, they will also try to push you towards doing certain things that you have, of the milestones that you have put forward. So I think it also comes down to the plan that you're initially making in terms of how fast do you want to do this. I mean, I see quite a few founders or former founders having, I'm scaling companies slowly. And I think there is a movement towards actually slowing a little bit down and seeing, and I think, again, that comes back to, but if you see an opportunity, if a customer reach out to you, a partner or an investor, and you can use that as a leverage, then I also think it's a good time to consider those things. But for me, pace is not necessarily at all cost. I would say that was the first company I had that I exited to Silicon Valley. I had an investor there, and he came in and he was just like, speed wins. And then he would just shout it out to everybody in the office, and he would fly back to Silicon Valley again. And I think he was right at that time, but it's also many years ago, and I really think times has changed. And I really hope that we, especially in Scandinavia, maybe can show we can conquer the world in a different and much more suitable way, where it's life balance and not anything else than that. So I really think that if you are in for that, 100%. Do it. If you can find those that also believes in it, even better.
Perfect. I think we are almost out of time, so if we could just have like 5 seconds each, what would be your best advice for scaling to a new market? Like which tool, where should you look?
I think first it's a considered and deliberate act. Listen to people, look at the data, make sure it's the right choice, and it's not just, we want to be in America, but actually where in America and why, and do you have market fit before you jump in?
I really benefited greatly for joining an accelerator in that market we were thinking of being in. So if you're an early stage, I would say go look for an accelerator, because that will fast track your knowledge around this country, the market, everything. And then going back to, is your product solving a need, and is there willingness to pay is always a good indicator. And then just go for it. I mean, learn it, fail it, and go back again.
And make 2 words.
Yeah. So first of all, get your shit under control. Make sure you don't scale too fast into new countries. Make sure that you know your decision makers in the new country, so you set up and you don't fail the first time around. And call me if you have any questions.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you.